Thank you, Senator De Leon, just uplifting our spirit, what we are doing. I just want to make all my international colleagues jealous by saying this. I have an opportunity to interact both with Governor Brown and Senator De Leon. I have never been able to praise them for what they did. They will cut me off in the half sentences. No, tell me what I need to do more. So it's really a pleasure for somebody working on climate change and looking at the desperation we are in to live in the state. Now we are open for questions. Maria, yes.
Suddenly I am speaking Spanish, so thank you. No, I'm saying that after your speech, I speak Spanish as well. Congratulations, and thanks for telling us that there is hope and there are solutions, and all the science we have been putting for all of those during these 2 days and many years of many of us here, they are useful, and you have transformed what we have been saying for many times. I want to tell you that you might not know it, but you should consider yourself as a little Minister of Health. And in that sense, as WHO, I am very happy to declare you Minister of Health ad honorem. And please make sure that you quantify the health benefits that we are obtaining when putting in place all of those politics, because I think we have a very bad record of not reporting back on the good successes that we had on applying environmental measures because of the health sector has been behind. It's the sample of lead in gasoline. They have been enormous, tremendous benefit from that measure for a public health, from a public health point of view, and we didn't report back enough on that. And if we report back, if we ensure this feedback, we will motivate more action. So more we document in terms of public health the benefits of what you are putting in place, the better it will be. And as a public health community, I'm sure that we can contribute a lot as well to push on that and to use you as an example. So thank you, Minister of Health, for your intervention.
Virgilio. Oh, Marcelo, please.
Thank you so much, Senator De Leon, for your achievement. First, you woke us up, which is fantastic. Second, not worries about your IQ. You're at least as high as Tillerson. And third is the matter of why California? Talk to us about your top 2 or 3 reasons of why it's not Washington State, it's not Oregon, it's not New York. What is it about California that enabled the leadership, the governor, you, your colleagues, to achieve the leadership you've been able to achieve in these?
Can we take one more question and then you can answer both? Yeah. Virgilio, please.
Well, my question was very close to Marcelo. First, saying that it's very inspiring, and congratulations to you and Governor Brown for the leadership. And I'll just compliment them, because my question was exactly this. Why was California so different? Why was there decoupling from the rest of the U.S. as far as climate-related and sustainability policies? And we have debated, and you were here in the past 2 days, whether or not we should invest more in communication so as to engage the general public, the extent to which this is essential. So if you could elaborate on this, what happened in California was that the public gave you support and gave the governor support to do things which are different from the sort of mainstream policies.
Thank you very much for the questions. A few things, I believe, and I think that there'll be many opinions across the spectrum on what are the leading factors. But I do believe, first and foremost, in California, we believe in facts and science, which is very important. We believe in diversity and inclusivity. We have immigrants from all over the world who want to come to America, but especially to a state like California. And in my district alone that I represent, I have 1 million constituents, separate from being the president of the Senate. And I have Chinatown, Koreatown, Little Bangladesh, Filipino Town, Thai Town, Little Armenia. I have the largest number of, I have also Little Tokyo. I have the largest number of Mexicans outside of the Republic of Mexico, in Boyle Heights and East Los Angeles. I have the largest number of Central Americans, Guatemalans and Salvadorians outside of Central America. So it's an amazing tapestry, so many different hues. It's a beautiful mosaic. So inclusivity, diversity are really key drivers in a state that values different perspectives, different opinions, immigrants that come from all over the world, from every continent, first and foremost, which I believe drives our innovation, which drives our creativity, drives us stretching and pushing the envelope. We're not tied down by traditional old norms or mores that maybe allows national governments or subnationals to be trapped in their own history. That's what makes, I think, California an amazing state. And when you have a professor like Marcelo, who probably was one of the first unaccompanied minors to come to California as a 16-year-old, presumably undocumented, from Argentina. Coming
Kevin, this is being live streamed.
Live
so
stream, okay.
If Migra comes to UCLA to get me, thank you.
When you have someone like Marcelo, come from Argentina as a 16-year-old, unaccompanied, no father, no mother, no parents, no uncles, and today is the dean of the School of Education at one of the top public universities in the world, UCLA, speaks volumes. And one thing too, separate from our diversity, is Governor Jerry Brown, during his first stint in the 70s, had the vision where no one else had at the time, both nationally as well as globally. So it is because of these policies through leadership that we try to create an environment. Now, out of fairness, California was not always like that. When you look at our history, we were not always like that. But today's age, California has really pushed the ball, which I believe allows that creativity to take place.
Thank you. I think there was another explanation for that question from our Chancellor, Marcelo.
Senator, what can we do to convince your colleagues, not only the California, but the other part of your country and the other country?
That's a very good question. I do believe there are certain more conservative states, red states in the United States, such as Texas, for example, such as Oklahoma and Iowa, now that are increasing their renewable portfolio standard, chiefly wind, for example. I do believe strongly that the economics, you won't be able to deny the economics, and that this type of business model makes sense, especially, I believe, I can't remember who specifically, that when you look at the price per capita with regards to renewable, and you look at other traditional fuels, it makes no sense whatsoever to continuously invest in incumbent energy sources when it actually, per price per point, is less expensive renewables. So the economics will be, I believe, a driving force. And I believe that with conferences such as this, with many leaders here, we'll be able to drive that point for other states, that it makes sense for your constituents, for your voters. It's the right business model. And one thing I want to add too is what helps us so much too is the knowledge and wisdom that you have compiled through the empirical evidence that helps us as policymakers. It informs our decision making. So all the work that you do consistently, there are, believe it, politicians who do read it, who go and try to understand your methodologies and try to really get into the weeds. What the work that you do informs us in our decision making. So we value what you do in your respective roles when it comes to the issue of climate and science.
Our President Von Braun has a question.
Gracias.
Thank you, Senator De Leon. It connects very well to our academy that you anchored your speech in the human rights agenda, climate change addressing as a human right is, I think, a very important and interesting perspective. And secondly, you underlined that you democratize the climate change agenda. Can you elaborate a bit more how the poor or low-income groups in California were protected? And secondly, following up on the earlier question from our Chancellor, how about going global, connecting to other nations? What you do in California rings very well with us in Germany, but I'm sure elsewhere in the world. So these two questions I would be particularly interested in.
Thank you very much, President Von Braun. The investments that we're making in California are very intentional, and they're guided by law. So it's not it's the right thing to do, because it is the right thing to do, but it's also the very smart thing to do if, in fact, we're going to reach our target goals with regards to reduction of greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide. So these investments manifest themselves in rooftop distributed generation solar, as well as investments so you can bundle rebates to purchase an electric vehicle. We are right now on the cusp of creating charging stations throughout the state of California. Not just in the neighborhoods where those who have the financial wherewithal can access that great technology, but making sure they're ubiquitous, just like gas stations throughout the state of California. That's always been the challenge of electric vehicles in any developed nation or any developing nation, is that, number one, that technology is very expensive. Number two, the infrastructure does not exist. So we're changing that, you know. If you build it, they shall come. It's a question of behavioral modification as well. What is that tipping point when folks realize, perhaps not for environmental reasons and not for climate reasons, but because economically it just makes sense that I'm paying less on a weekly, on a monthly basis. So those are the types of investments we're trying to make. Energy efficiency, which is labor intensive. It must be done physically on site. Therefore, when it's HVAC systems, when it's insulation, when it is the low-hanging fruit, when it's sensor lighting, as well as double-pane windows, window fenestration, this must be done physically on site. So you're creating jobs. You have to put people to work. You're growing the economy, you're cleaning up your air, and you're reducing greenhouse gases. And this is what we believe that we can export to other developing nations and other industrial nations throughout the world. We can also learn from other nations ourselves. We can learn what has been successful, and we can export what has not been quite successful in California, what you should not do, and vice versa. This is why these exchanges are so critical for developing nations who don't have a sophisticated grid, for example, because that's a tremendous amount of investment to make for a grid, and it just costs too much money. Then we can talk about, you know, community grids, you know, microgrids that can help communities that don't have access to electricity. These are type of technologies that we can export to other parts of the world. So this is why I find it exciting. But let me emphasize one last point on the issue of democratizing our climate change benefits. It's not only because it's the right thing to do, because it is the right thing to do, as articulated so elegantly by our Pope Francis in Laudato Si, the encyclical, but also too out of the self-interest of our own macro global targets. Because if only those, again, in the most exclusive communities throughout the world have access to the greatest technologies, we will never meet our macro global targets. We will never meet our macro global targets. That's why it is actually incumbent that any policy in any nation or subnation democratizes the benefits of climate change. That we know that greenhouse gases and climate change is not regional, it's not local, it's not statewide or national. It is global in nature. Some nations have different types of sophistication. Some have no grid at all whatsoever, or a very limited grid system. So how we deal with this differently in other parts of the world will be very critical, but the solutions are there, the technologies are there, which is very critical to underscore.
Thank you, Senator. The question was, what is California doing to go global? Governor Brown, do you want to address that, or you want to save it for tomorrow's speech?
One more, Jerry.
One more? No, that's good.
You got it, yeah.
Normally, when given a microphone, a politician never says
It's a
no.
dangerous thing.
Now that I have the microphone, I'm not going to let it go. No, I'll be speaking tomorrow.
But I'll get my 5 minutes tomorrow,
Yeah.
just by the way.
Right. No, I'll talk about that tomorrow. But just in a nutshell, there's an organization of subnational groups, the Under Two Coalition, that involves states and provinces from all over the world. And so things are being shared. And that's only been going a couple of years, and it will continue to expand. So we'll well, maybe I should, since I'm here in the Pontifical building, I should quote Thomas Aquinas, omnis bonus diffusus est. All good tends to diffuse itself, and that's true of California.
Thank you. I have to ask a procedural question to our Chancellor. We are about 15 minutes delayed. Can we have another 5 minutes, because there are 3 more, okay? Howard Frumkin, and then Andy Haynes. If any other questions, raise your hands.
Senator, thank you for your great work, your leadership, and your vision, and thank you for your medical role. After 2 days of grim news, you were a walking, talking antidepressant.
Organic. Yeah.
So you've heard over the last couple of days that those of us in the health sciences look at tackling climate change as an enormous public health strategy and opportunity. You've heard how eager we are to weave health insights into policy making. So I'd like to ask you, during your policy journey in California over the last decade or two, how did you weave health input into policy making? What sorts of technical input did you get from health professionals? What sorts of support, technical or otherwise, would you like to have had more of, if you could have? And how would you guide health professionals in other jurisdictions in supporting their political leaders in doing what you've done?
Well, let me say that the presentations that I have heard so far today on the health consequences are incredibly compelling. To the Director of Public Health and Environment of the World Health Organization, Maria Neira, to actually see the slides that one of the leading causes of heart attack and strokes is because of our air quality. This data is very critical data. I think that in the fight of climate change, we have, and I'll admit for myself, I won't speak for others, not really incorporated this. I think before it was about the environment. It was stated about polar bears, the caps melting. And perhaps there was a narrow constituency that had a really large visceral impact. To me, it never had much of an impact, and I largely drove my policies based on the economics, on the job creation as a result. The evidence now that I see is so compelling with regard to air quality, and when you have the #1 reason for absenteeism in our public school system in California due to asthma, and what the economic multiplier effect negatively is with regards to a single mother who's a housekeeper, who has to spend a whole day in an emergency room with her child. She loses that day of work. That puts her at risk for not being able to pay for the rent, the food on the table. That has a real impact. So the more data you provide us is incredible. I represent also my district. I have 6 major freeways that crisscross my district like a serpent that chokes the oxygen out of a young girl's lungs. I have the 2, the 5, the 10, the 60, the famous Hollywood 101 freeway, the 110 and the 710 freeway. All this carbon dioxide that's emitted, obviously atmospherically, the GHG, and the other criteria pollutants, which are the air pollution right here. So that data, we need to continuously put it out there. because the negative impacts are huge. Sir Haynes had mentioned in his presentation, I believe, or in his commentary, with regards to quote unquote a health tax, because someone is bearing the cost for the health consequences, and it is the taxpayers of America and the taxpayers of other nations who are bearing the real consequences of the healthcare costs due to climate change.
Well, let me join others in thanking you for your inspirational words and your deeds as well. And I want to ask you really, what's the kind of long-term vision here? Because it seems to me that what you've done is you've embarked essentially on the first phase of the circular economy that we touched on briefly. In other words, really a revisualization of an economic model which is based on natural systems and protecting and preserving those systems, and on reuse, remanufacturing, recycling to sustain the economy indefinitely. And do you see it that way? Is this, in your view, the kind of next stage of your vision, or are you going to stop at 100% renewable energy?
No, that's a very good question. I think that you can't stop the advancement of ideas. Once they're catalyzed and they're compounded, that we don't want to stop. That's the last thing we want to do in California. We want to keep pushing the envelope, there's no doubt. And we will continue to push the envelope until our air is pristine clean, which it is not. Until we can actually have real jobs that are created for real Californians, such as individuals here from the countries, whether it's Argentina or elsewhere, they can create real jobs for their communities. Let me give you a case in point very quickly. Just 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago, I was in a community called Lancaster, California, which is north of Los Angeles, a semi-rural area in comparison to a very urbanized metropolitan area like the city of Los Angeles. We were there for the grand opening of a Chinese assembly plant, BYD, Build Your Dreams. And we were there to cut the ribbon for an assembly plant, not a manufacturing plant. The manufacturing is in China, but the assembly plant for electric vehicles. 800 workers, very high unemployment area, no doubt about it. They disproportionately took the brunt from the economic recession a few years back. And there, it was astonishing to see electric buses, UPS, brown electric vehicles, to see double-decker red buses on their way to London and to the United Kingdom that were being assembled largely by a minority workforce who are having high wages in comparison to the zip code, the area. And they were there because of the policies that both the governor and myself and others have worked so tirelessly on in concert with each other. That's what happens when you move policies with intentionality that send the right market signals, that attracts the necessary capital that are vital to create the technologies to meet our very ambitious climate target goals. And with the innovation, with the creativity, we catalyze that capital. But leadership is needed. Short of that, the free market forces will never correct these inequities.
So Jeff Sachs will have the last word.
But it's really, of course, an incredibly powerful success that you've created, one of the few on the planet. And you've made the whole business ecosystem work. Because you have the renewables, you have Tesla, you have Google, you have the IT industry, you can make the smart grids, you have the venture capital. So California is in a position, probably together with China, to be the two centers of global technology in this area. So it's an incredible boom for the economy, I think, for the next half century also. My real question is how you march it east now. And we'll take it as much as possible in New York immediately, but all that place in between. And the real question is how can we help state by state understand that this is absolutely practical, good business, real, no joke, and let's get it done. And so that's for you and beautiful presentation, and also for the governor tomorrow, perhaps.
Thank you, Jeffrey. What I would say is this, and you make your points very concise with regards to practical, real scalability. So regardless of political ideology, partisanship, as you just stated, it is practical and it is real. What is stopping this type of progress from being exported to other states, but especially to the nation's capital, is a lack of political leadership. You have politicians who are intentionally and purposefully making winners out of losers. When you have the price point, would you rather pay for a salad $1, $2, or $3? And if it's a good salad at $1, why are you going to pay for that salad for $3? It's nonsensical. It's illogical. So the question, obviously, is political in nature, or I should say the solution, because we've been provided all the amazing empirical evidence, and to have someone who, like the Pope, with Laudato Si, the encyclical, who will have much more reach than we could ever fathom as elected officials, as prime ministers, as presidents can, to have someone like the Pope reach the masses globally can help turn this tide and put the pressure on politicians. Washington, D.C. is a very unique case where you have presented enough empirical evidence and all the scientific data to say, if you do not act now, then we put the world in peril. That's why I believe subnationals are very critical. You remember the Kyoto Protocols. There was euphoria because that was perhaps the Paris Accords of 2015 back then. However, it was the United States that helped undermine the implementation of the Kyoto Protocols. And then the shot around the world was AB 32, the Global Warming Solutions Act. And the cap and trade program preceded that right there. So it's political. And I believe, whether there is a change in the White House or a change in the House of Representatives or the U.S. Senate, I believe that hopefully that another political party will see and understand the economics and not cower in fear, and understand this makes sense business-wise, it makes sense economically for constituents, and it makes sense for the lungs of our children, because greenhouse gases don't discriminate. There'll be other communities who will be much more resilient because of financial wherewithal, but ultimately they will be impacted. Perhaps later rather than sooner, but they will be impacted because it knows no borders, as we know.
I should have asked, if I could, I should have asked a question about Thomas Aquinas, because we have the two world's greatest scholars of Thomas Aquinas sitting face to face between Marcelo and the governor. But maybe we could do Thomas Aquinas tomorrow, Governor.
A round of applause to our senator.